It's the first ever WWE PLE in Paris, which means it's time for the first ever 5-0 betting Clash in Paris. Next. It's the end of an era with the last Peacock PLE before we get very annoyed about having to switch on over to ESPN and whatever plan they want to give us there. But let's not worry about that right now, so let's get right on to betting Clash in Paris. But as always, let's start with our recap, and first we had 2 nights of SummerSlam, so we went 4-2 for night 1 of SummerSlam, as I missed Tiffany Stratton retaining versus Jade Cargill, and also missed Drew McIntyre and Logan Paul defeating Randy Orton and Jelly Roll. Both of these were full unit bets, so those really hurt because I had a lot of confidence in those 2 bets. Then in night 2, we also went 4-2, as Solo Sikoa retained against Jacob Fatu, and also Dominic Mysterio retained against AJ Styles. I was definitely surprised that the first 5 matches of night 2 were all retentions, and while I was perfectly fine with Sikoa getting the win there, as that would have been my pick on almost any other night, well, at least I kept it light with only a quarter unit bet. But similar to the Jade pick, I thought it was the right time to change it up for AJ Styles to beat Dom, so that one hurt a little bit at a half unit bet. Regardless, it was very strange as I missed the 4th and 5th matches in each night, so yeah, that was pretty weird. So regardless, I went 8-4 for both nights of SummerSlam, which takes us to an overall 33-8 record since BackLash. And that is still just barely over our target of 80% at 80.49%. But those night 1 losses really cost us in our units, so we only barely were up 1/2 unit for the entire weekend of SummerSlam. But we still improved a little bit to being up 9.25 units since BackLash. But props were a completely different manner, as I was probably hurt because they popped up right before I was about to film, so maybe I didn't get to put my full thought into it this time, and it showed with the record being just 5-7, and I lost 2.75 units. Alas, that's not good at all, but that's also not what we're here for, so let's stick to our strengths here and get right to the matches. But before we get to the matches, as always, we have to get to the history of our PLE, and, well, I guess there's not much history here because this is the first ever Clash in Paris and the first ever PLE in Paris, but it is the second PLE from France, as in 2024, BackLash was in France. But even though that was only a year and a half ago, Jey Uso is the only superstar who appeared in that PLE who will also be in this PLE, and he also lost the World Heavyweight Championship match there to Damian Priest. But it's more important for us to look at the first PLE after SummerSlam, and since 2022 we've had a European PLE in this spot, starting with Clash at the Castle in Cardiff, Wales in 2022. So in those 3 years worth of PLEs, we've had 10 total championship matches and 2 title changes. However, both of those title changes were for tag titles, and both of them were not contested at SummerSlam. But if we flip that around to something that might make more sense, we had 8 title matches where that title was also contested at SummerSlam, and in all 8 of those matches, we had retentions. And since we have 2 title matches here, and both of those titles were contested at SummerSlam, that gives us a strong lead towards the champions. So let's get to our picks and start with those 2 championship matches. And first, we'll go with the World Heavyweight Championship with Seth Rollins as the new champion, and he's your favorite at minus 3,000 for 96.77%. And he's followed by LA Knight at plus 600 for 14.29%, CM Punk at plus 900 for 10%, and Jey Uso at plus 1,000 for 9.09%. I simply can't make a case here for either Jey or for Punk right now, as both were recent champions, and I'm pretty sure if they wanted Punk to be a champion right now, he would not have lost in just over 5 minutes at SummerSlam. And it is nice for Jey to stick around the title scene, but I think that's about all. So why LA Knight? First, if anyone doubted Knight as the real pick at Saturday night's main event, well, you better not say anything anymore, because Rollins ate that BFT and took the loss on purpose, so Knight winning was always the plan. So thank you very much, right there. But anyways, Knight not having won a world title before at least gives him an outside chance at this, because if there were any swerve that's coming, well, I think he's the only one that makes sense to do this. But it really just isn't time yet, so I think if he is going to win a world title eventually, it should be in a one-on-one match. But why Seth Rollins? Well, just the history as we discussed, plus we expect champions to retain in fatal four-ways. And he also just got that title, and it simply makes no sense for him to pull off the ruse of the century and then immediately lose the title. And since the story seems to be about every man being for themselves and the other three contestants not being able to work together right now in order to get a win, we simply have to go with Seth Rollins as the pick. But the only question is, how big of a bet should we place, as minus 3,000 is awfully short. But since we don't see a title change at all here, we're still gonna go with a half unit bet. The other title match is for the Women's Intercontinental Championship, with Becky Lynch still as the champion at minus 700 for 87.5%, taking on Nikki Bella at plus 400 for 20%. So why Becky here? Well, yet again, the history that we just talked about, and also she's just doing too well being a sniveling heel right now. And we also just picked her husband to retain the title, so neither of them are going anywhere. Also, she is the greatest of all time, and it's not just her saying that, Sports Illustrated is saying that. But on the flip side, we just haven't seen enough from Nikki, and the eye test just doesn't add up for her to win yet, as the Rack Attack 2.0 attempts have left something to be desired so far. We simply need to see more out of Nikki in the ring, since she's only had one one-on-one match since 2018. And maybe, just maybe, if she proves something here, we might consider her to win later on. But why Nikki right now? Well, she is also a Hall of Famer, and that's pretty good too. She's also very popular in and outside the ring, and if you're looking for a title change here, well, it simply makes more sense to do it with this title than with the other one, and since Becky has held this title longer than Rollins, well, I guess this would have to be the way to go. But Nikki's done more damage with her mouth than with her hands so far, so we're simply going to stick with Becky Lynch to retain and make this a half unit bet. Well, that's it for title matches, but we have a good old-fashioned Donnybrook match with Rusev at minus 400 for 80%, taking on Sheamus at plus 250 for 28.57%. So why Rusev? Well, this is his first real feud since he returned to WWE, and it's been a rather underwhelming start so far, and Sheamus has been a good first opponent for him, which has at least emphasized the hard-hitting style of both men. So while Sheamus' status is much more cemented at this point, Rusev really could sink or swim based on the outcome here. And though WWE didn't invest a whole lot of capital into Rusev, as he signed just a 2-year deal, there is still plenty of time left that they really should want to see if they can make him look strong and make this work out. So should he win, I tend to think he'll start to look at that IC title, which makes sense if AJ Styles also wins on Raw the very next night. But if he loses, well, I haven't really got a clue where he goes next, except maybe he'll try to just beat up AJ Styles if he loses to Dom instead. So, I don't know, maybe he'll go after AJ Styles either way. But why Sheamus? So while both men are from Europe, which kind of makes this match a sensible pick for being on the PLE instead of just on Raw, Sheamus has the home field advantage here, as a Donnybrook match is indeed his match. We most recently saw Sheamus defeat Pete Dunne in a Donnybrook on October 7, 2024 on Raw, but that only improved his record to 2-1 in Donnybrooks because he actually lost the first ever Donnybrook to Drew McIntyre on SmackDown on July 29, 2022, but he did quickly rebound to win the second Donnybrook as a member of the Brawling Brutes, as they defeated Imperium at Extreme Rules on October 8, 2022. So although Donnybrooks favors Sheamus, I really think Rusev needs to win this one, and he can't cement himself as a monster considering the lack of rules in this type of match. So Rusev will be the pick here, but I simply can't go big, so I'll make it a quarter unit bet. Match number 4 is a one-on-one bout between Roman Reigns at -2,000 for 95.24% implied probability, taking on Bronson Reed at +700 for 12.5%. So why Roman Reigns? Well, let's start with WrestleMania 40 because everyone knows he lost at WrestleMania 40, but before that, he took 2 DQ losses, but his last legitimate loss in a one-on-one match was at TLC in December of 2019 against King Corbin. And even in that match, that required help from Dolph Ziggler and The Revival. And though Reigns hasn't had many matches these days, that is still a very long time since he last took a pin in a one-on-one match, excluding WrestleMania 40, of course. And since his loss to Rhodes at WrestleMania 40, he actually only has one one-on-one win, and that was against Solo Sikoa on the Netflix premiere of Raw, and he's actually only 1-2 in all singles matches, so it could easily be said that Reigns needs a win here. And as I pointed out on a recent Stats of the Week, Reed's affiliation with The Vision isn't helping him, as he's actually 0-3 in one-on-one matches and 1-7 in all matches, as his matches are the ones that are treated as afterthoughts, and they're pretty much just meant to injure the opponent, but it still keeps costing Reed those losses. And in those matches, Breakker forced 2 DQs with spears, and Reed also hit Jey Uso with a chair shot for the other DQ loss. But of course, it's very likely that could happen again here with Reigns getting the DQ win, which of course is certainly good enough for betting purposes. And in Reed's big prior feud, which was against Seth Rollins, Rollins won the first match before Reed won the second match. So it's certainly possible that we go down that route again here so that Reed could possibly get a rematch at Crown Jewel in his native Australia in the biggest match of his career, which would be his chance to get the win. So why could Reed win here? Well, there are times when I'm glad that the doc is not here, but I suppose I still need to say what he would want to say, and that is Roman Reigns has not won a one-on-one match without anyone else helping him since June 17th, 2022 against Riddle on SmackDown. And that doesn't mean that any of those other matches weren't legal interferences, but it was still help nonetheless. So there's simply no one here to save him this time, as everyone with a beef with The Vision is already in that Fatal 4-Way match against Rollins, and I think that makes them unavailable here. And also, Jimmy Uso, Sami Zayn, and even Jacob Fatu simply don't make any sense at the moment for them to help out Reigns, since Reigns hasn't even appeared on SmackDown since WrestleMania, despite being on the SmackDown roster. So Breakker's full availability easily could be enough to distract Reigns just enough to give Reed the edge here. So let's face it, Reigns is leaving right after this match to film Street Fighter, and he's scheduled to be there from September 2nd through September 26th. So it seems to make the most sense for Reigns to be leaving injured after a bunch of tsunamis and maybe even some spears. So it feels like we know the ending to this match, which is Reed and Breakker injuring Reigns with those tsunamis and spears to knock him out for a little while so that he can go film Street Fighter. But the question is whether that happens during or after the match. So of course, Roman Reigns just does not lose matches like this, so I have to think it will be the latter. So Reigns wins, and then he's simply beaten up as Reed retains the Shula Fala and all of his heat for knocking Reigns out for about a couple months. So that will set up that rematch at Crown Jewel, and so Roman Reigns is our pick, and we're making this a half unit bet. And finally, we've got John Cena at -700 for 87.5% implied probability, taking on Logan Paul at +400 for 20%. So why Cena here? Well, Cena is having a rough go of things all of a sudden now that he's a good guy again, as he lost to Rhodes and then took an F5 from Brock Lesnar at SummerSlam. Then on SmackDown, he won his tag match with Cody Rhodes, but that was only because Logan Paul got DQ'd for hitting him with a low blow. And then, of course, on this week's SmackDown, he took a big right from Paul to end SmackDown, and he was laying on the ground. So no, unfortunately, we don't know what will happen on this upcoming SmackDown before we have to film this, so we don't know what we're gonna get to help us out there. But it is safe to say it wouldn't be the best for Cena to go into WrestlePalooza for that ESPN debut by having taken all sorts of losses leading into it. So if we're looking ahead to WrestlePalooza, you have to think the odds of losing to Lesnar are higher than they are of losing to Paul. And I simply don't think we want Cena to lose every single match up until the end of that retirement tour. So maybe for Paul, the quality of the match is more important than whether he wins or loses. So I think that's just where we stand here, and I keep going back to Cena's promo from this week's SmackDown where he said, "You will either understand what it means to give up yourself for the business I love, or I'm gonna beat the ever-loving crap out of you." So I have to think that is some sort of meta moment there with him giving himself up by letting Cena go over. But if it's the latter case, well, I can't really just see Cena just beating up Paul now that he's a good guy again. So I have to think that the former of those two options is what we think is going to happen. But why could Paul win here? Well, if Paul is indeed a future WWE champion and WrestleMania main eventer, this would be a big notch on his belt, and he would certainly lord that over us for the rest of time. So that's pretty much all there is to say about Logan Paul, as he has won both his WrestleMania and SummerSlam matches, so he's not really in need of a win at the moment. But I think it's safe to say that this may really be about the man that's not in the match, Brock Lesnar. So we don't yet know what the message is that Lesnar gave to Aldis to relay to Cena, so perhaps we'll find that out on SmackDown this week. So the question is, will Lesnar show up at Clash? And I hate to think the WWE is just going to repeat SummerSlam, so if Lesnar shows up during the match, well, he's probably just going to do the same thing anyway, regardless of whether it causes a DQ or not. And if he shows up afterwards, it really is just a blatant repeat. So let's hope that that doesn't happen. So I think it is better to not get Lesnar at Clash, and instead, with Orton now RKOing McIntyre on SmackDown, and with McIntyre being aligned with Paul, I think that the typical WWE overbooking of main events could apply, and I think I prefer if Lesnar's music hits right before Cena's about to end the match with an AA, but instead McIntyre claymores Cena, and then Orton RKOs both McIntyre and Paul so that Cena can pick up the win with an AA just right about at the right time as the referee comes back to life. Then maybe, just maybe, Lesnar can show up on the Titantron instead with a couple nice words to end the show. So I don't love the -700 odds here, but I still like John Cena to win the match, so he is our pick, but we have to keep it small, so it'll be just a quarter unit bet. So after taking 4 underdogs for night 2 of SummerSlam, we are simply going back to picking all the favorites right here. So we've got Seth Rollins at a half unit, Becky Lynch at a half unit, Rusev with a quarter unit, Roman Reigns with a half unit, and John Cena with a quarter unit. So remember never to bet more than you can afford to lose, and remember that this one has an early start time of 2 p.m. Eastern, and also enjoy this last normal PLE on Peacock on the last Sunday before the start of the NFL season. But also remember to go back and check out this week's Stop the 10 Count, where I talked a lot about both Cena and Reigns right on over here. So until next time, I am the SportsZu, and this is a podcast that still needs a new name.